This is a little bit different, and I'm looking forward to it very much because it's called broadcasting. Oh, thank you. You obviously don't trust that I can stand up for 45 minutes. Okay, excellent. I'm with you guys. So, broadcasting in the software-defined age, and we're going to be, of course, looking directly at broadcasting, but with a slightly different twist, because part of what we want to do is to see if we can learn from people who have been through this kind of transition, but maybe in some other disciplines. But fortunately, the people we have here are people who can see both sides. They understand our industry, but also many of them have been a party to activities on the other side. We have actually increased the team, I think, from the original plan. So if you look, we've got 5 of us, 6 with myself. I'm not going to go through a long-winded sort of introduction of all the names. So in fact, it's probably a good idea to let them introduce themselves. And actually, I'm going to ask each of you sort of, what is your take on this topic? What do you think are the key issues in terms of the transition from traditional broadcasts through to what we've called the software-defined age? So the names will become apparent. You know many of them already, but let's start with George there on the far side. George, introduce yourself and tell us what your take is on this topic.
Thank you, John. My name is George Both. I'm Vice President of International Sales at Telestream and have been for several years. Curiously enough, by the end of this week, after the end of this week, I transitioned to a new role which has more of a global strategic marketing focus. So this is kind of an opportune time to be thinking about these transitions of industry as well. We've been, as a company, been involved technically in the software-defined age for about 5 or 6 years. We've been building workflow solutions for broadcasting and production systems for about 5 or 6 years, except nobody ever actually called them software-defined. But effectively they are. They're putting a variety of services on standard compute platforms and allowing people to perform production functions on those instead of on dedicated single-function hardware appliances. There was a question earlier this morning which I recognize, which was about capacity planning. You know, the transition is from a system where it's very easy conceptually to work out how many ins do you need, how many outs do you need, how many cross points. Everything works perfectly all of the time, to one where you know how many users you've got, but what is your peak load? At what time of day does it happen? How much processing power do you need to support that? So that's one of the challenges that we find ourselves in discussions with almost every week with customers. But we've seen it happening for 5 or 6 years. It started with the file-based world. It is now migrating to live, and all of the standards for whether it's transport stream over IP or simply 2022 are enabling us to blend the technology we've been putting in for file-based IP software-defined workflows and adding live workflows to that. And I see that as a much bigger challenge just because of the needs for real-time, low-latency, defined isochronous operation.
So when you say it's happening now, and I think I'm going to effectively repeat your words back to you, it's either going to be effectively SDI over IP or it's going to be transport streams over IP at the moment as opposed to native IP.
Short term, that's the only things we've been asked about from customers.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, George. Mark, your take on this whole story.
Thanks, John. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Mark. I'm Vice President of BT Media and Broadcast. So, for those who don't know, we're the media services part of BT. We're not BT Sport or BT TV, or indeed BT Group. We're a separate part, which is designed, our only raison d'etre is to service the global media industry. And at the heart of that, I guess, is networking. So we would purport to do a lot of other things in the value chain, but our kind of core business is moving media around in a heavy lifting environment. And I'd agree with everything that's just been said in terms of software-defined networks aren't new. We've been building networks in IP I think 2004 was the first one that we put out there. And that involved taking MPLS, which is a very kludgy telco type of network, and breaking it down to IP and then rebuilding it again the other end. Not the ideal thing to do, but we were using IP. I think we'd argue that we've been using software definition to run that network to a certain extent. But everything we're doing going forward in terms of client networks, and as many of you will be aware, we rolled out a new network for ITV 2 years ago. We're midpoint through rolling out an entire new network infrastructure for the BBC right now. Our underlying guiding principles for that is that it's an IP network driving uncompressed wavelengths. Because, you know, what do our clients, and let's put it at the client head on here, what do our clients want from their broadcast networks? Well, they want them to get cheaper, but they want to do more with them. So, you know, emerging standards of 4K, et cetera, et cetera. So addressing that by going down that road, but of course, you know, it's a minefield because the standards are emerging. Yeah, there's a couple of different standards kind of competing at the moment, although it looks like they're going to start to even out. There's interoperability, so we're spending a lot of time with hardware in our labs at the moment, making sure that everything works together. And there's also the thing that we must never forget, and John, you know me, it's all about the craft in the industry, is that this audience, and indeed this forum, and the industry that we work in, is a craft industry. So we're talking about, on the face of it, perhaps replacing a lot of very, very experienced broadcast hardware manufacturers with IT. Now, 10 years ago, that would have been heresy. It's now looking possible, but do we really want to do that? And I would suggest that there's a blend. There's a blend of the understanding of the industry and the flexibility of IT. And neither should be denigrating the other.
I know your sort of feet are pretty firmly in our broadcast and media industry, but from the BT perspective, do you have any insights from what several years ago the telco industry went through in their transition? Is there anything we can gain from that? That's different. One of the differences is, you say, we're a creative and a craft industry, but the question still stands.
Yeah, from a telco perspective, an IT perspective, it's just take a deep breath and do it, actually. Otherwise, you wouldn't have had the revolution in MPLS networks, which really kind of run the data industry right now. Although, again, the groundswell, headwinds, whatever, are now pushing everybody towards that kind of open IP standard. So, you know, BT, my parent company, is taking that very, very seriously, because, you know, clearly from a UK perspective, it's a massive infrastructure. From a global perspective, it's got a network running into 170 countries. So I would say, yeah, take a deep breath. Take a deep breath.
Yeah. Bogdan, introduce yourself and give us your perspective on this.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bogdan. I'm the CTO and the founder of TVBEurope. My background has been, really, I was one of the first guys at Research Motion, now BlackBerry. So I got to live through the evolution of wireless technologies quite well. I got to live through going from dial-up, like most of us here, right? Dial-up at home to now 10 gigabit networks that are very feasible. I think the industry really has multiple categories here because it's all about definition and requirements on a different type of category. So I think there's the contribution world, and that's split into two. It's fixed contribution and on-the-fly contribution. So things like sporting events where you can put in fiber and you've got locations where you know you're going to be broadcasting from, so then that's pretty straightforward. You talk to our friends at BT and then you get a connection in and there's no problem. But then there's unknown events where things just happen. So now you have to be able to provide first mile services through other means such as satellite, wireless, whatever you have available. And those are always tougher. And then the one sort of in the middle is things like the Republican convention and the Democratic convention in the US, where it's a temporary thing and it just goes away, so you have a temporary venue. That's on the contribution side. Then you've got the internal part of the network, which is sort of your broadcast facility, which is a complete another requirement and standard, and you want to move with extremely fast speed, really, really large pipes. And then there's the distribution, which is really the last mile that's the problem. It's not so much the distribution that's the challenge. So I was talking actually to George a little earlier, and I was saying that we take video, sometimes encoded at 5 megabits per second, which then want to bring it into our broadcast facility, move it into a 40 gigabit E stream, and then store it into whatever we got, 100 megabits per second, and then re-encode it back out to 20 megabits to deliver to the cable provider, which then destroys it back to 3 megabits per second. So we're doing a bunch of bloating in the middle just to store that content. And I think the networks today and some of the technology that's coming out today is allowing us to sort of maintain the quality without necessarily bloating the efficiency, because it does come down to CPU, it does come down to the requirements and peak capacity. The one thing I would say to some of your points, George, I think they were very valid, and I agree with most of them. I would also say that it's not only about figuring out peak capacity of your network or peak requirement, it's also understanding how much you're willing to pay for inefficiency. Because you've got cloud providers out there that can offload some of that peak capacity. So there's a way of providing a private-public cloud environment which allows you to plan for average capacity and handle peak capacity off-site because you've got fast enough links. Yep. So there's ways to be more cost-effective. Because I think our entire industry, as far as broadcasting goes, is challenged on that and the business model itself. And I think we have to be very well aware of that and sort of be cost-effective, efficient, and be able to deliver the requirements that we need. The good news is technology's here. We started with software-defined networks. Now we're doing software-defined wide area networks. So we basically took a VPN and started putting rules around it. So now we're calling it an SD-WAN. And that's expanding the office further out to your other offices. And I think standards is a challenge. But as you said, they're sort of becoming more and more normalized. The one good news is that everything is going towards one standard that existed for a long time. An IP packet is an IP packet. An IP header is pretty much the same thing all across the world. So at least we don't have to worry about PAL and TSC, and we can move a packet from North America to Europe. And you don't have to do a standard conversion in between it. So by going down that road, we actually have an opportunity here to actually reinvent the entire industry and potentially move forward a lot faster. But that's just my 2 cents.
IP4 packet or IP6 packet?
Well, fair enough. But that's coming along quite well. Actually, an interesting side fact, Apple stopped accepting any IPv4 only apps as of June 1st.
Right.
So now they're forcing everyone to go to IPv6.
Okay.
So.
Sylvain,
Hi,
introduce
my name is
yourself.
Sylvain Thévenot. I'm the managing director of NetGem. NetGem is 20 years actually and has been providing, you can hear me now?
Yep.
Right. Been providing TV solutions for telecom operators, so covering around 20 customers around the world and a bit more than 5 million users. The key part of here is I'm not coming from the network side, we're more coming, if you want, from the device in the home. But interestingly, NetGem has moved increasingly into the network and particularly into the cloud environment. When NetGem started, clearly we were talking mostly about hybrid set-top boxes and evolving and supporting the growth of IPTV with large multicast deployment like SFR in France from 2004 onwards with up to 4 million IPTV set-top boxes deployed. And I think when you look at the evolution, what happened is our telecom operators had to embrace the evolving needs of more content, more devices, and inevitably what it meant evolving into a much more cloud-based environment. So multi-screen clearly is a key part of our proposition. We launched EETV 18 months ago here in the UK. And OTT creates some interesting challenges. For example, a couple of months ago, one of our customers in Luxembourg, Post Telecom, the incumbent telco, moved their whole new TV solution, so their new TV service is 4K enabled now, from their own IPTV infrastructure end-to-end to a full OTT there. So when I say full OTT, I think the interesting analogy here, as it was said earlier, is the trade-off between the investment required versus the flexibility associated with what you need to provide. So the interesting mix that they've actually combined is using our cloud management platform, and we always differentiate the management platform from the actual video acquisition and distribution side. So using our cloud management platform to give them more flexibility to add things like enhanced metadata, social media feed, IMDb feeds, and so on to the actual experience across multiple devices, but keeping the acquisition and distribution in their core fiber network, essentially. So if you want, what is interesting is moving into this space, they are trying, and obviously we'll see if it works, to combine the best of both worlds, which is keeping for quality control, and of course, because they manage end-to-end and have the expertise of managing end-to-end the acquisition and distribution of the video in their network, but keep the flexibility now introduced of a multi-screen solution that actually would talk in real time to the cloud platform in order to provide the best mix between some of their IPTV managed network streams, OTT, and obviously other parts of the experience, and all combined into a set of multiple devices. So our challenge increasingly is to support the operators finding the best mix of the CapEx and OpEx whilst retaining that flexibility, and that's clearly a challenge every day in our conversations.
Actually, you just reminded me of sort of interesting thought. With all this development, is IPTV, the true definition of IPT, is that going to disappear now? Because the concept of a fully managed network, I'm not hearing it so much from you guys, it's different approaches. IPTV, is that going to be history anytime soon?
I'd be the last person to sit in front of an audience like this and say that. I am a shareholder.
Well, you could be the first.
And the last at the same time. No, I think IPTV is bound to develop into something else. Yeah. From a BTTV perspective, it's a very, very successful platform, as is EETV, SFR, etc., etc. It's got a moment in time. It's got a place in time. You know, I'm still an old-fashioned broadcaster. I like big valves and things like that.
I think there's an
Do we take your answer in that context, do we?
Make a comment on the IPTV and OTT part. I think again, it really, at the end of the day, it's about delivering the right quality at the right moment to the end user for the best possible cost. I mean, that's really what all the operators are looking to do. And clearly, if you want to add a number of niche channels, I don't think you necessarily need an IPTV, full managed network for that. You can add a few OTT. But if you want to deliver high quality, like BT Sport as a in HD football match or even in 4K, I think you need to rely on the IPTV for that. So it's finding the right model for the right content.
But I will also say that I think the other challenge is not everywhere in the world the last mile is developed.
Yeah.
If you look at delivering, because I was going to actually ask the question in your environment, what do you define 4K as over OTT? What bandwidth?
Well, I guess it's what Netflix would use, which is their 24 meg stream.
Right. So if you go to Sky Sports or anybody like that, and you ask them how much what the bit rate of a 4K football match should be, it's at least 40 megabits per second. That's where you start and going up from there. So I think that's a bit of a challenge as well, and we just have to wait until that happens.
Ali, your turn.
I was just going to say that, isn't it interesting that ostensibly this is a session about software-defined, broadcasting in the software-defined age, and yet we've already heard about SDI over IP, about developments in codecs, about cloud, about MPLS, about so many different aspects of what our industry is going through. So I think what we're really talking about today is broadcasting in the internet-defined age, and really looking at software-enabled capabilities and internet-enabled and internet-inspired capabilities and what those might mean for us. So I think we would all, I think, agree that the developments in the internet have really transformed the relationship between the content creator and the content consumer. And my name's Ali, by the way. I work for the BBC as head of technology direction. My role in the BBC is to really look at the 18-month horizon, look at what's about to happen, and help shape our technology strategy, help our architects understand what are the strategic architectures we need to put in place to help us transform. So we've already discussed that we've just signed a contract with BT to help transform our network. That's one aspect of that. But I also represent the BBC into the DPP. So the DPP, if you don't know, is a membership-based organization. It's a business change organization. tries to do three things. It tries to gather industry insight collectively. It tries to identify what the changes are coming and how do you prepare for those. And fundamentally, it tries to help businesses grow their opportunities, to look at where are the challenges and opportunities that are going to come and how you might ready yourself for that. And what we shouldn't forget in all of this is that transformation between content creator and content consumer is often happening in ways that the content creators and consumers don't even realize. And our role, alongside in this room, alongside defining the technical roadmaps and the technical challenges and the steps that we might need to take on this journey for all of us, whether we're large enterprises like the BBC or small providers, is to bring those content creators and consumers along with us. So often the decision makers are those who are actually making programs. Content is our currency, and we shouldn't forget that. Or the financial directors or the chief operating officers. And I consistently hear, what's the value case for us to invest in any of these developments that we've just discussed? That's both internally in the BBC, but also in the discussions that the DPP has amongst its members base. So I think we have a dual challenge here, and it's because we are moving at different paces. I was at NAB, and what struck me for the first time after attending conferences for a decade is that the big vendors, Telestream and Viz and Sam and others, have for the first time really shown a plethora of products which are so mature. I was so inspired by the quality of what was on display. It really looked comprehensive, end to end. The stack up and down, they were able to articulate what they could deliver for the likes of me as the BBC. But I was also struck by the amount of how many global giants were there who had either partnered or acquired smaller companies to help push forward some of their capabilities around cloud services and around different aspects of what they're doing. So whether that was Google, Microsoft, Intel, Cisco, IBM, or Amazon, they're all accelerating the amount of investment they're putting into all of us adopting their services. And that's a massive challenge. And so our industry is going to be caught in these different races that we're in, and we need to really help those decision makers in our organizations understand what is the right choice to make at the right time.
So we talk about IT and IT systems. Is that just a stepping stone to even greater cloud use? I mean, in the consumer world, you buy this nice new product, and then there's another shiny product a year down the road. We're getting into IP systems, which, of course, cloud's being used today, but not everywhere. Is IP just a stepping stone to putting a lot more in the cloud, George?
That's a really interesting one, John. And I can perhaps illustrate that with our own company's developments in cloud-based processing, predominantly transcoding over the last few years. We had a few years where customers were saying to us, you've got to have a cloud story, you've got to be on the cloud, you've got to be on the cloud, and we did it. And then there was tumbleweed. There's very, very few people in reality used it. So we don't, we're beginning to see some more uptakes, edge cases, disaster recovery, special events, but we're not seeing a huge rush to do the mass volume, heavy lifting processing on the cloud. And for some people, it's an economic decision. When they look at the economy or the costs of running 20 servers 24/7 in the cloud, they realize it's actually more expensive than doing it on their own premises. For some people, it's a security decision or a government policy decision about where media is stored. So there's many, many other barriers to going on the cloud than, say, exist for a consumer at home, where obviously it's easy and it's very attractive. There's clearly no doubt that people like Amazon and Google and Microsoft are making a lot of money from cloud services, but our customers in high volume media processing are not rushing there in the numbers that you might think they would have been doing based on the requests we had a few years ago.
George and I would...
What I was going to say, I thought the main reason for that was mainly the bandwidth availability. So the delay that it's inherited by moving the file from your premise to the cloud to do the transcode and back to the cloud. Because I would actually agree with you that the cloud can be more expensive. Typically it's not, but it can be if you ask for SLAs. If you go to Amazon and actually ask for an SLA, it will go straight to the roof, the price. It will not be anywhere near what you could actually do it in-house. As soon as the SLA comes off, all of a sudden you have an opportunity. But I really think it's really all about the connectivity availability that was the challenge, and the speed of the connection availability. So that inherently puts a lot of delay in just moving the files back and forth.
I was just going to say that George and I talked about this just before the session started. I think we're in broad agreement, and just to echo what you've said, the DPP did a recent piece of work on connectivity, and amongst our small to medium-sized production community. What came back is our production members really understand what connectivity could enable for them. But there are some fundamental limits to what they can achieve. Often it's the physical environment they're in. The building in Soho just doesn't have fiber and it would cost too much. But other times it's really about the use case that they might want to apply to. So if you were to look at what's happening around news and short-form content being pushed to online platforms such as YouTube and Facebook, well, in essence, those producers who are pushing that content are already using the cloud. They just don't realize it. That is the cloud. If you were to look at how long-form productions might adopt cloud-based services or other use cases, then the value case doesn't stack up at the moment.
Right.
And I think you have to be nuanced about the use case you're describing when you're talking about the journey towards the cloud. So, for example, Telestream and other vendors absolutely will have a market for the types of product and services they're selling, which help us deal with the realities of the workflows that are in place today and what we're doing today. But at the same time, we're seeing a massive change in certain parts of the industry which are accelerating towards delivering content rapidly to consumers. And the quality threshold isn't always the barrier anymore. It's not necessarily that you have to deliver the highest quality, because the audience is primed sometimes for certain use cases to accept a lower bar. That's an anathema to all of us in the broadcasting industry. For us, the quality metric is always one of those things that we use to define whether we should step forward or not.
Sylvain?
I'll add one perspective on that. I think, as I said before, we tend to separate the cloud used for content acquisition and distribution from the management platform itself. And what we see with our operators is they typically are very cautious about encoding or hosting content in the cloud. As I said, for less frequent, lower usage type of content, I think the case is quite straightforward, but it's less so for high demand, high peak usage video content, especially for live in particular. However, on the management side, I think what is interesting is increasingly we are moving most of the, if you want, intelligence in the cloud. So how to manage different profiles across a particular user that has multiple devices. And in a quite dynamic environment, so there will be new content added, there will be new personalization rules, there will be enhanced metadata added. And interestingly, operators are slow in the ability to actually add new content, add new metadata, even simple metadata or enhanced data. And the cloud gives them the ability, in our case, to manage the experience in a flexible and cost-effective way, however, protect the quality of the video within their own premise, essentially. So
it's not just about the content, it's about the other stuff as well, Bogdan.
So one of the things I also realized that I think I'm going to take a really weird definition on the cloud. And I think in my opinion, what the cloud is a more effective way of using CPU, storage, bandwidth, availability. So why? Because more people use it, but they don't use it at the same time. Therefore, different peak times allow you for more efficient use of that same CPU. But the interesting thing that's happening, based on what I just sort of defined it as, a lot of companies that are large enough, they're starting to realize, and they're building their own data centers to be able to share those resources and move the on-prem stuff to off-prem, but in a private environment in their own data center, because that's what connectivity allows today. So they're reusing the same resources, reusing the same stuff that Google, Amazon, et cetera, are giving us, to share those content resources among themselves. I think BBC is actually doing that themselves. And you have your own private environment, and that is really what satisfies some of the security requirements, bandwidth requirements, accessibility requirements. But I think that's going to be more and more long-term, because I just don't see a consumer-type product long-term 100% available to broadcasters.
Yeah. I guess one of the things
Not for all cases.
Yeah, I guess one of the things also is that we have to take a bit of a shortcut in given time and discussion, but you really need to break it down application by application ultimately, because some applications obviously lend themselves more to cloud applications.
There's a redefinition of cloud. There's a redefinition of cloud as we speak. So again, a couple of years ago, what was cloud? It was storage. And quite naturally, when you're talking about assets, there was a reluctance to put the asset in the cloud. I think that's moved on surreptitiously. The amount of broadcasters I speak to now who are doing it, toe in the water. It's not the prime content, but it's toe in the water stuff. That's happening. Like you, Ali, going to NAB this year, for the first time, I was surprised by the amount of workflow solutions in the cloud, which are baked. If you look back to 2008, 2009, around about then, you've got HP playing, you've got IBM playing, you've got us playing in all these software as a service platforms for workflow, none of which really ever grabbed hold. Whereas now, as you say, Sam and people like that putting some very credible cloud-based offerings out there, which are baked, which have customers working on them. And that's what's moving cloud, more so than just storage, I think.
But I guess you also see, and welcome your comments, that a lot of people are saying we're moving into an era of trial and error to a certain extent, and that you've got to maybe have 5 different concepts which you trial, knowing that only 3 of those are going to perhaps take off, and you've got to be able to scale those up quickly and quietly and cheaply drop the others. Is that a feature of where we are?
Well, I mean, to answer your question, I'll just to reframe it a little bit. If you were to ask, what does broadcasting in the software-defined age mean to me? And I think it means flexibility of your technical capabilities, right? So to a degree, that's what you're alluding to, about the ability to scale up and down. I think more fundamentally, it offers flexibility in your business model. Right. So the ability to scale up and down to serve your audience or your customer. And for the likes of telcos, looking at capabilities such as software-defined networking makes sense because they have that scale and they can truly apply it. I looked at some Gartner data just before coming on the session around SDN, and as of January 2016, only 2,000 customers had actually fully adopted SDN in its purest definition. Lots more had taken on aspects of what might be coupled under SDN around orchestration and around virtualizing their capabilities. But if you then start to look at that business flexibility, just coming back to the business flexibility aspect of it, understanding for a small organization, which the likes of the DPP represents, at what point do you start to take advantage of this is a critical question, because they can't afford the sort of scale that the BBC has around piloting and testing some of their 2 or 3 or 5 different opportunities. Yeah. So I think it's incumbent on all of us, and I think the early session today with AIMS and AMWA was really important, and it showed how we need to come together to collaborate around interoperability, around application of standards where they're appropriate, around sharing best practice, because we can compete commercially and editorially. We don't have to compete technically. There's enough space for all of us. The biggest competition we're going to face is from the Googles and the Amazons, not necessarily from those who are sat in this room. Yeah,
I think there also needs to be greater collaboration between suppliers and end users in this new age as well. It doesn't work having that separation. But George?
Just one added comment on the challenges for customers moving to cloud for some of their processing. I've heard people mention the connectivity, moving content up there and down, the government rules on security, their own personal objectives. Part of the challenge is the pricing model. It's a developing industry, and every supplier has a different pricing model. Some will charge you by hours of machine time, some will charge you by minutes of content, some will charge you by gigabytes of file. It's a real challenge for a customer to predict and estimate how much it will cost them to do that particular job on the cloud. Whereas if they come to any of us as suppliers and say, give me a quote for this system, we can give them a price down to a penny or a cent or a euro, and they will know exactly what it's going to cost. It's much more challenging on the cloud for them to know exactly what it will cost. There's a lot of variables, a lot of unknowns, and that, I believe, has been one of the barriers to more widespread adoption.
I guess there's also, I don't know if someone wants to comment on this, I guess it's very difficult doing the comparison as well between traditional and the new, because you might end up trying to persuade someone to spend more on a cloud solution if you could demonstrate to them that they're going to make savings elsewhere.
I won't name the situation, it would be unfair, but I've been through a very recent situation where someone wants to do an archive conversion from one format to another. It seems like a classic case for the cloud. It will take about a month. So we do the calculation, we can estimate it because we have a model where we can charge by minute of content, and we gave them a figure. And the customers looked at that and said, but that's about half of what it would cost me to buy a system. Yeah, And then afterwards, if I go cloud, afterwards I've done the work and I have nothing. If I buy a system, I do the work, and afterwards I have a system that, because it's software defined, can be repurposed to some other function in the company. So they've actually made the decision to buy. So the OpEx route is not always the preferred route. But as suppliers, it's critical that you give people a choice and let them choose whichever one fits their business model at the time.
Two things have struck me about this conversation in recent times. One is that as individuals, how can you bring an economy of scale when you're having that discussion? You know, if you're comparing what we're doing now, the cost for now, versus a capability which might carry some risk, but might open up some opportunities, it's very difficult if you're just having a binary conversation about what do I as the BBC do, or what do I as production company X do. What's been really interesting, and I'll bang the drum about the DPP because I'm repping the DPP today, is when we've talked to small to medium-sized production companies, when we talk to post houses, we've seen a change in some of the business models. So lots of service providers are bundling up not only their service layer, offering you edit capability or grading capability, but also offering back-to-back technical capability. So dealing with the connectivity issue for you, dealing with the fact that they might offload some of the content onto the cloud. By doing that, they can then serve multiple customers. So they are building in economies of scale by bringing together lots of vendors and suppliers and fronting that out into the content making community. And I think that's really interesting, the developments that are happening there. I think alongside that, we also have to have one eye on the opportunity of the future. And then again, you know, my colleague Peter, who's in the audience now, but talked earlier about object-based broadcasting and the work he's doing through Ames and Amware. That's really important. So where do we think the differences are going to come which make software-defined developments and internet-enabled developments interesting for content makers? And I think it's some of the work that we are, you know, the experience that we all collectively bring around understanding what is happening with content is going to help separate us from the Amazons and the Googles and others. You know, there's stats from Cisco, from Ericsson, from Cass Business School and Imagine, all purporting that between 2019 and 2021, almost 70, 80, 90% of all consumer internet traffic will be video. If that manifests, I mean, the exact number doesn't actually matter. If that's the trend, then that's a great time to be in media. If you are involved in making, shaping, moving content, this is win-win. And what we have to figure out is what's going to be the thing that keeps us in the game.
Okay, let's see if there are some comments from the floor. We're already running out of time, but yes, there are comments from the floor. Either a question or an observation, both are valid.
Chris Collier from BBC Global News. I wanted to come back a bit on the live thing and ask the panel whether they, or what they think of the short form content and whether they define, we're talking about broadcasting in the software defined age, whether they define things like Facebook Live and Periscope, which are social media platforms, as, you know, broadcasts.
Definition of broadcast in the software defined age.
I'm staying away from that one.
I won't let you.
I will say that I think that's going to provide different mediums, and we have to take advantage of those as broadcasters. It would be foolish not to. It's another audience that we don't have today, so that's another viewer. It's up to the business folks to figure out how to monetize that and make more money out of it. And I think it's an opportunity rather than a challenge. A lot of broadcasters that I speak with, they find it as a challenge, which I think it's foolish. Change will happen, and you have to embrace it. And if you refuse to embrace change, it doesn't matter. And the other part of your question was about short-form broadcasting and availability. I think more and more of those platforms will become available. I think the challenge that's sort of across everything is ubiquitous connectivity. How do you provide connectivity in any environment? And that is the real, because connectivity sort of became like water today. If you don't have it, you're not part of the world. And you need to have it. So I think that's one of the things, for example, that we try to always fix and try to address. And you'll see some pretty cool stuff coming out of IBC about it. But that's, I think, embrace the new technology and be part of the ecosystem. Otherwise, we're going to fall behind, because what are we good at? We're good at creating content, and good content.
Good question, thank you. Any more comments from the floor? Okay, getting close to closing anyway, so I'd just like to ask each of you what you think is going to be the the next most significant development that we should be looking out for in this whole sphere? What can we anticipate over, well, you've mentioned 12 months. What can we anticipate over the next 12 months in terms of change, George?
I think it's just a continuing path down this road we're already on of combining both the live and the file-based workflow environments into one unified infrastructure, all IP-based, all based on standard computing platforms. Whether they're on-premise or on cloud is less important than the fact of the underlying technology is standard computing platforms with software services sitting on top.
So the elements are all there. We also make it work over the next 12 months.
So from a software-defined networks perspective, it'll be when one of the vendors, such as a Perry, launches and secures a large contract and starts to change the way in which people procure on the edges. And I think that will be one of the drivers. It may be a Perry, it may be somebody else. I mean, there's plenty out there. And then, of course, there's the implementation of the standards, and you're quite right, there are a couple of standards which are now starting to really solidify. And then we'll see a big broadcaster start to make use of it. So that's within 12 months, it's within 6 months, I believe.
Okay.
Well, I think we're working on the building blocks still of this entire world, and they're not fully entirely there yet, as George just mentioned. Mark just mentioned standards and making sure they're there. But it all comes down to the other building block, which is IP, and making sure that is there, and making sure that's there for the different situations that you will need it in. And I think there will be a lot of innovation around that. We certainly are working on that, and we're all about trying to provide reliable connectivity anywhere.
Sylvain?
Oh, many topics come to my head. But,
30 seconds.
I think it's sort of mentioned earlier is I almost don't want to use the term social TV, but because it's been used, damaged, and I think not really understood. But I think when broadcasters truly embrace the power of social and find a way to make it non-intrusive, but actually enhance the relationship they have with the audience in an integrated fashion, I think there is definitely a space to go up there.
And Ali?
Everything that everyone's just said. Plus, when 8 billion video views a day is the new measure of success, so Snapchat, Facebook, and others are there. And I think understanding that those views are made up of amateur consumers who are putting out live streams and file-based video, but also small professional units who are now multi-channel networks. And success can come very quickly for that industry, and they can compete with the established players very quickly. So if you look at some of the cream of the crop of YouTubers and others, their revenues are massive, growing really quick. So I think that's one to watch.
All right. So some very good insights there. Please thank our panel for their comments. Thank you.